Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Point Break by AM Network. I'm Antara Gupta. On National Space Day, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with the founders and CEOs of 20 Indian space startups. This wasn't just a ceremonial photo op. The room represented the entire stack of India's emerging space economy. Rockets, multi-sensor satellites, in-orbit computing, and even pharmaceutical manufacturing and microgravity. PM's message was quite clear. India needs to create a quote-unquote aura capable of attracting the best space engineers, companies, and patient capital from across the world. And 6 years after India opened its space sector to private participation, that ambition is starting to leave the pitch decks. We now have around 440 registered space tech startups and nearly $620 million in private funding. But having said that, the biggest shift isn't just the funding part of it. It is a structural redesign of how we operate in space. ISRO is moving away from routine launch vehicle manufacturing. Mature systems like the SSLV are being transferred to private industry, allowing ISRO to focus strictly on frontier research and development and deep space science. India, in fact, wants to grow its space economy to $44 billion by 2033. But having said that, global leadership takes more than affordable engineering and policy support. It requires repeatable missions, it requires flight heritage, trusted technology that the world cannot easily replace. So today we are asking the multi-dollar question here. When the world thinks space, will it think India? Joining me to debate this are three founders actively building this future. Suyash Singh, co-founder and CEO of GalaxEye, a company building the world's first multi-sensor OptoSAR Earth imaging satellites. Lokesh Kabdal, who is the co-founder and CEO of VyomIC, a deep tech space startup building advanced positioning, I believe navigation and timing satellite constellations. And of course, my third guest is Samuel John, founder and CEO of mistEO, a company turning Earth observation and climate data into mission-critical decisions for enterprises. Welcome to Point Break, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Glad to be.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I want to jump right in here. India wants to become more than just a cost-effective launch destination. Now, before I get to that, I believe you three were in that same room with Prime Minister Modi. If you could just tell us one by one, how was the experience? What were, I would say, the taking points of that entire conversation? Lokesh, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. I think, first of all, the experience was overwhelming, I would say. And the interaction was quite informal, as in we have not prepared for this kind of informal discussion with the PM. And he knows about the company, what we do, what the competitors are doing right now in this particular space, right? So particularly for the PNT, as in both the Prime Minister as well as the NSA, GWG, they're asking questions regarding the nitty-gritties of this ecosystem, right? What China is doing, what US is doing, particularly in this particular space, how we can be the global leader on this PNT navigation. They've also asked us to submit a pager, a 5 to 6, 7 pager report on what we are doing, right? So they're very interested on this particular domain. They know about it, right? They have done their homework being at that stage and knowing all these details is pretty wonderful, I would say, yeah.
I'm sure. Samuel, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, so from my perspective, the meeting was absolutely essential, and the ability for us to essentially brief the leadership of the country on the different aspects of work that we are doing and how that is strategically placed, both from domination in the space industry, which is not far away from in the future, and also looking at Italy, specifically the downstream application side, which a lot of companies were there. As Lokesh has put, the meeting went really well, and the participants and the Honorable Prime Minister as well as the NSA, they were very well prepared to receive us and talk to us. So therefore, there was not a lot of introduction that we needed to give. I think they were very pretty well briefed about it. And what I found was that some of those, there were a couple of decisions that were taken there, and things moved quite fast. It's hard to see that it had that effect.
Right, absolutely, Samuel. Thank you for that. Suyash, your thoughts?
First of all, thanks for having me here in the conversation. Glad to be back. I think it was kind of an informal celebration of the National Space Day. which of course has happened for the last 2-3 years. And this was a pretty special celebration where he invited all the private space startups to be in the same room, interact with him, and interact with one amongst each other, right? And it was a full celebration of also the developments and how far we have come from 2021, since the time national space policy was, or rather the in space was formed and the space was liberalized, privatized, reforms came out. I think the honorable Prime Minister was pretty curious in terms of understanding what each startup tries to bring on the table. So in the mode to listen to how government is helping the entire ecosystem. Is there a gap in his understanding of how things are progressing? Is there something that he can do? He was very proactive about it.
Okay.
And he was also trying to understand if some of the qualitative goals that he set for himself are being achieved or not. For example, bringing the talent back, building some of the IP that is world's first and being driven by India, right? I think it was not just to say, okay, these are the 10 or 20 startups who are important. It was to make a statement that India is going to drive space for the globe. And if you want to build something in space, you better be or come and partner with India. I think that was an underlying and inherent statement that he was trying to make, and it was fairly enjoyable. I think
I'm sure
every founder in the room enjoyed that entirely.
I'm sure. In fact, you three are not the only one. This meeting that has taken place, it's already making rounds in the tech circle. Everybody has just one thing to say, that how well they were received, how well their ideas were received, how well the conversation really flowed. And I believe the fact that Prime Minister really took time out and met 20 space startups, I think that is by itself a turning point when it comes to the private space sector of the country. Thank you for sharing that, gentlemen. Okay, so you're starting with you. When international customers look at the global supply chain over the next decade, what must India become unconditionally known for? Would you say it would be our launch cadence? Would it be our Earth observation capabilities? Or is it something else entirely from your vantage point?
I think it'll be very difficult to choose and pick one, because I guess there are great startups, great companies who are already building into different segments, from upstream to downstream. You take launch vehicle, or you take Earth observation, or you take PNT, or you take comms, or you go to downstream on the weather side, on the land use, land classification side. I think we're literally touching every part of the value chain in space. I think my answer will be a little more subjective here. Indian supply chain in space will be globally known for its own quality, right? World's first IP, and it will change the way how India was looked upon earlier, and how it's going to be looked upon from now on, right? I think launch is just a start. We have been very successful in launch vehicle as a country. Be it how ISRO took it for the last few decades. And now, the recent launch of Vikram 1 is a great testament to what can be done from this country. I think the next step will be, to prove the same on the satellites, to do it on the downstream. And I think we're the only, fourth or third spacefaring nation at that scale worldwide. Right? We will be known for every part of the ecosystem, in my opinion.
Okay.
And we'll be known for the quality at the cost that we will bring on the table.
All right. Thank you for answering that, Suyash. Lokesh, to sort of build on that, we constantly hear about this cost advantage, right? The cost effectiveness and the cost advantage and a world-class engineering talent. But having said that, and beyond that, what do you think is India's distinctive technological advantage right now? What is it that would prove to the world that, we are indeed a global hub and not just a growing domestic market?
Correct. So I think cost is one of the important parameter, but it should not be the deciding parameter, right? Because let me give you my example, right? Currently, we are building a global satellite constellation for navigation. right? And we will be launching our first satellite next year. And currently, we are focusing on the PNT payload, which we are developing, right? But the satellite bus, which we have, we are looking for global vendors, right? So if an Indian company can look abroad for getting the satellite bus, right? The global customers are not bothered about the cost, right? The cost will get you into the conversation, but the reliability will keep you in that conversation, right? So reliability, quality, and standards, these are the things which we have to follow at this point of time. So we already have the technology, right? So India is known for its technological development. We have the capital now. We have the patient capital in India as of now, right? What we don't have is customers as well as trust, right? And this is what we need to build in the next decade. We have done missions in isolation, right? Now the next decade is about getting the customers, try to build the trust in the technology which we have built. And also we need to move from missions to infrastructure, right? Now we need to build global infrastructure which will then cater the services, right? So we are building a global satellite constellation. It's an infrastructure of infrastructure, right? PNT is the backbone of all the infrastructures. GalaxEye is building a satellite constellation for Earth observation, right? So mistEO is doing the same. So we need to now move towards the global infrastructures to cater the services.
All right, understood. Let's also address the elephant in the room, which I believe is ISRO's structural pivot, I would call it. You know, ISRO is officially handing over the manufacturing and the commercial operation of mature rockets, starting with the SSLV, of course. Samuel, I want your take on this. Are Indian private companies actually even ready to take on that sort of manufacturing integration and mission assurance of, you know, systems like PSLV and LVM3?
See, the short answer to that question is yes. ISRO is, while developing technologies, they were not just an isolated organization building it. They were rather, I would say, a system integrator of sorts. So there is a large ecosystem of suppliers that already been supplying to ISRO, which is now then has new customers in these private launch vehicle sector. So that the short answer is yes.
All right, I think Samuel seems to be facing some sort of an internet connection here. We'll get back to Samuel in just a moment. Suyash, meanwhile, you know, looking at this from a payload perspective here, how should ISRO transfer that institutional knowledge in mission assurance without making private industry permanently dependent on them? Should we expect a long phase of joint operations first? Is that the way to go about it?
Well, I think there are different perspectives to that, right? Like, I mean, I don't think in all cases there is a straightforward technology transfer that is happening between ISRO and the private startups. There are definitely a bunch of cases where the TOT is happening, you know, which has been, of course, really deep researched technology that ISRO built in the long tenure has been given away to the private startups for a cost, right? Of course, that is a part of the system. But a lot of other companies, you know, other startups which are already there, they are doing their own research and development on their own payloads or, you know, their own technology. So I think it's a two-part system. I think, you know, in my opinion, both these systems have to kind of continue in their own research roadmap, where ISRO should kind of be taking a really big leap and doing extremely cutting edge research, you know, which one could not imagine even in the next 20 years to be done by a space startup or so. I think they should attempt, and they will attempt, those kind of research line items.
Right.
While private industry is more short term, you know, where they're trying to commercialize a bunch of technology line items that can be built from India, you know, which can also capacity gap, right? ISRO has already proven a bunch of missions. You know, for example, the optical satellites have gone up back in 10 years back. SAR satellites, they have already built up. Right? There are some capacity gaps in terms of the number of satellites, in terms of, you know, new innovations that a startup can bring on the table. But I would say these are like all 5 to 10 year kind of R&D things, right? And because the startup has to monetize and has to commercialize in that period.
Certainly.
There's no There's no way other way. Well, ISRO can actually do a frontier research, which is a 20-year horizon cycle, right? Which I think the private industry is not going to attempt. And these two things have to complement, for India to be positioned as a global leader in space.
Understood. Thank you for that, Suyash. And before I move on, Samuel, would you like to finish what you were saying? Please.
Yes, yes. I mean, to complement some of the things that Suyash has actually talked about, a very key word in that is commercialization, right? Now, how do you really prove the worth of the work that we do is to basically find the commercialization aspect, and we believe that the private sector is very well, in position to do that. And I think a lot of these space startups have actually proven that, that is the case. To refer to my earlier question in terms of the technology transfer, again back to Suyash's point, it is not just that here you go, take the technology and off you go with this, but it's more of the lines of here's the technology, here's what you can do with it, and here is the level of hand holding. Oh, by the way, for the past 30 plus 40 plus odd years that we've been doing this, we have created an ecosystem of players who are mature enough to support you on that journey. And that is extremely important. And that then brings back us to the fundamental question: as ISRO proceeds to do these fundamental, futuristic research, the private space sector will have to also catch up. And then, of course, there needs to be, information transfer and creating these integrated mission structures where both the parties actually benefit. So that's essentially my thing. So it's a good thing, and it needs a lot of handholding and maturity, proficiency that needs to be given, which only at this very present moment ISRO can provide.
Right, certainly, Samuel. Thank you for that. I also want to talk about if India can convert that cost advantage that it has into global trust, because we can build systems competitively, but space relies on absolute trust. Right, a cheap launch means nothing if a multi-million-dollar payload fails to reach the orbit. Now, Samuel, again, from the perspective of data and downstream analytics, when a global client buys into an Indian space product, how much of their decision is driven by price versus the trust in the underlying infrastructure? If you could give us a peep into that.
Commercial organizations build work on cost. So let's get that absolutely straight. It's about providing those services at a cost which is viable for the organizations to pay. That's number one. Trust is built over a period of time. Okay. At that cost, if you are able to deliver and consistently deliver, trust automatically builds. And the inflection point is where trust, vis-a-vis cost, comes at the most optimum rate. Then it becomes interesting for the commercial organizations to, continue providing these services. But I'd like to just make a point on the cost side of things.
Yes, please.
Cost advantage. Reports have come out, I think a couple of days back saying that the launch capacity, I'm just talking about the launch side of things, it is probably the highest. I'm not sure which university did that study, but it seems that we are $30,000 per kilogram, which is considered to be one of the highest in the world. How do you bring that down? Is to have more constant launches, and over a period of time, the cost has to come to a level where we can compete globally. And when we want to do that, you need to have cadences that are weekly, monthly, the kind of vision that, our friends at Skyroot had talked about, that needs to come into play. But then the downstream side, where most of us, like for example, VyomIC and all of us operate, downstream is a very mature industry. There are technologies that are there. There are many companies, in India that still does downstream work at fantastic cost points that international customers actually subscribe to. Now, imagine layering, more intelligence on top while maintaining that cost structure. That would be, a very attractive point. And this is the kind of conversations that we are having with our customers, both nationally and internationally. Right. So it is a scale over a period of time. The inflection point will come maybe in about 3 to 4 years. This is at least my assessment.
Understood. Suyash, you are launching complex star satellites, right? What must Indian hardware startups prove, in terms of flight heritage and reliability before, these global and international customers entrust them with these mission critical payloads? Do you think we can retain our cost advantage, while simultaneously building the global tier testing infrastructure?
No, I think, see, from my viewpoint, I mean, I totally disagree with the fact that, space industry, Indian space industry will play on the cost advantage. I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I think we are building world-class IP, building a lot of things which is world's first. So we are not here to compete on costs with the other countries. We are going to be building world's first IP of its own kind, because I think we are, at least in space as an ecosystem, ISRO has given us that advantage where we have the vendor ecosystem that can build space grade components and so on and so forth, right? So I think, I mean, pure play from a cost advantage perspective, I think probably some of us will be more expensive than others, when it really comes to buying a product. And that is something that everyone has to note. Right? Like, unlike other industries, we are not talking about cost advantages at all.
Okay.
We are all trying to play value proposition games.
All right. All right.
Trust is definitely one point, but I think in space, trust is very binary. My rocket reaches orbit, which means you can trust me, and it's visible to you. If my satellite is in orbit and still operating, you can trust me, it's visible to you. Can I launch a satellite? It can operate for a few days, it is visible to you, and you can trust me for that.
Okay.
If I can give you an imagery that is really valuable to you, you can trust me. So I think trust is very transactional in space industry, and you can really validate anyone's product just like that.
All right. Thank you for that very candid answer, Suyash.
Yeah, and the only question here is, I don't think we will all play on cost advantages. It's going to be really cutting edge value. We might come at a premium by the way.
Okay. Thank you again. That's a very honest answer. Thank you, Suyash. We also celebrated the fact that India has 440, if I'm not wrong about the number, 440 space startups. But at the same time, if you're being honest, only a fraction of them really possess operational products and, the recurring international contracts. Lokesh, my question is to you here. As someone building navigation constellations, what do you think is the, I would say, biggest bottleneck preventing Indian startups from, progressing from tech demonstrations to, actually winning these massive international contracts?
So I think, first of all, even in the technology demonstration, we have a couple of bottlenecks. One of the biggest bottleneck of the space industry in India currently is the supply chain, right? If you ask any space founder, like, what is the pain point for you? Like, they will directly come to this point of supply chain. We don't have enough supply, enough vendors in India to give us that kind of flexibility, right? To build it in a very fast manner. And we have to move very fast in this data age, right? We have to build products in less than 2 years, right? We cannot spend, being a deep tech company, we cannot spend 5 years, right? What is being expected from a deep tech company that they will take 5 to 6 years, right? But at this point of time, let's say the global supply chain is very fragile. It takes years for some components to reach to us, right? I mean, if you're building a constellation, let's say we have to build 250 satellites. Now I have to build 250 satellites, and most of my components is coming from abroad. As in, for everyone, right? We know, we all know, we can always say like we are 100% indigenous, building it in India and all those kind of stuff, but the component, sub-level component are coming from abroad. The FPGA boards, the clocks, the oscillators, everything is coming from abroad. Now, if you're building at a scale, you need to have that supply chain in India, right? So I think that's the biggest bottleneck, and we need to do something about it. Like, we need to build warehouses, we need to build a supply chain, we need to build MSMEs, we need to enable them, right, to supply this global infrastructure projects.
Understood. Thank you for that, Lokesh. Samuel, looking at the entire ecosystem here, launch, satellites, propulsion, and downstream analytics, which segment do you think is the closest to achieving true global scale today? Are we going to see 50 global companies, or will this market consolidate around, say, a handful of just well-funded leaders?
As is the case with any business and startup ecosystem, consolidation will happen. Failures will be there. Companies will shut down, and the consolidation will happen. So let's be very candid about that.
Yeah.
What is interesting in the space industry is that you cannot just say that, okay, is one particular sector of the entire downstream, upstream ecosystem takes more precedence than others. So if you want If you want to do downstream, you need to have assets there. So then, of course, upstream becomes very important, right? And then the midstream space. So everything has to move in tandem, pretty much, from an indigenous standpoint of view. And these business cases have been proven time and again. I mean, it's not that it is the first time that this is being done, but first time at scale, and perhaps even looking at tangential as well as, let's say, tangential technologies that needs to be brought into picture. So my answer to that is that everything, including upstream, downstream, midstream, has to proceed in exactly the same pace. In some case, the maturity for one of these components one of these industry side would be much earlier than the others. For example, the upstream side, the launch and other things, it was definitely the forte of ISRO. But that has been proven that private space companies can come in and have the launch capabilities, which has been proven for the past 3 years. On the downstream side, from the application perspective, again, I'm telling you, there is sufficient amount of organizations, private sector companies that are doing both national and international, projects and products. They are positioning themselves across the world, and I think, if, at least from my biases that I have, because I work in the downstream space, there is a lot of maturity in that. What is interesting though is the capacity part of it, wherein if we want to go in and build more and more applications around it, the customer side of the business, the customer side, the paying customers, they are far few in between, and we have a very large dependence on the government kind of an ecosystem. So really, we cannot just pinpoint and say, okay, be the leader, be the loss leader, and then one fine day everything will come together and fit in one piece. Each of these components have to move at pace, supporting each other, and that would be my answer to that. And in relation to what we need to achieve strategically here in India is the access to space, and that then means that there needs to be a much more importance that is given to the upstream side of things.
Okay.
And that would really change the way we are positioned across the world.
Certainly, Samuel. I also want to talk about the fact that space is incredibly capital intensive, and historically NASA or the DoD for that matter, they acted as I would say the anchor customer for companies like, say, a SpaceX. My question is, can private space companies in India really scale unless the government departments first become reliable and early customers? Do you think our procurement systems fast enough to support startups that don't really have, I would say, a 10-year financial runway? Samuel, the question's for you.
Do you want the party line and do you want the honest answer?
I always want the honest answer.
Okay. Yes. I mean, in the previous response that I gave, I told there is an over dependence on the government contracts to actually work with, and literally private space companies are actually working with organizations and organizations in the government. At least in India, we are competing in that perspective. And the capital intensity is another major aspect of it. Again, the biggest elephant in the room is the patient capital that needs to flow in, which right now is coming from the VC, from the VC, ecosystem. The bankers are still bankers. There are brilliant, offers and brilliant schemes that are offered for supporting the space industry, but the bankers go back to the question of what is the asset that we can put in place so that we can enable this capital to you. And that is the chicken and egg problem that almost all the space companies, including us, we or at least including us, we have faced. Coming back to the point of in terms of sustainability, the decadal sustainability that is needed for companies like us, for example, to actually make a difference. Yes, the government sector is now kind of opening up. To be very frank with you, we've had really good interactions with them, and we've had sufficient support from this ecosystem. And through the cost factor, the trust is now being built up to the point that we can now walk into any government, supposed government contracts, and we can, bid, and we can actually win that. So the capability is proven, the cadence is proven, and of course, the trust factor has been built up. And it was not an easy journey. I mean, we started off, about 6.5 years back. in the space that we are there, it was extremely difficult because, it was kind of what they call it, a cartelized cocoon, so to speak, where it was very difficult to enter, but we have proven our case. And I guess that's the same with every other single space organization and the space startups in the country. So yeah, that's my response.
All right. Thank you for that, Samuel. Suyash, should the government guarantee demand for strategically important hardware technologies during their early years? And also, how do we do that without really creating a bloated ecosystem that sort of survives only on government subsidies?
Interesting question. No, I totally agree that we have to, the government has to, and government is already, right, trying to be the first customer, and they are really opening up in every bay, in every sector, in every department. And some of these strategic technologies have to be backed by the government. And I think they have taken definitely a good note of it. They are coming up with programs, like if you see IDEX programs in MOD, InSpace has come up with interesting technology adoption funds, right? So incentivization schemes, there are, different ways for them to procure products as well. I think it's also, the matter of, it is taxpayers' money, right?
Yes.
They also have to be very mindful of spending that taxpayers' money. So they're saying they are trying to de-risk that through incentivizing startups in a certain way. But they're also seeing that if the maturity level of the startups or the technology is going in the right direction, they want to really become the first few customers of that, right? I think that is already happening in motion, and the momentum is building up. We'll only see more and more in the coming years.
Right.
Does government become the only customer? No, I don't think. At least in space, it's a very dual use system, right? The same imagery can be, or satellite imagery can be used by an agricultural, use case. Can be also be used by, anyone else, right? So there are multiple users of the same satellite imagery that one can bring up. Same in the PNT case, right? Lokesh is building PNT-based satellite. You use GPS on a daily basis on your phones, right? And if that can come from space, you're not a government player who's using that, right? So I think space will eventually find its feet on both the sides. It's on both the sides. It'll be the government use cases as well as the commercial use cases. I think the first few years have to be seeded and have to be led by the government. And I think they have taken note and they're doing it. Okay. So I guess the momentum has to be on both the directions. Initially, commercial will be slower, but government has to take the lead.
Thank you for that, Suyash. Lokesh, do you mind sharing your thoughts as well on this?
Yeah, I think I'm completely aligned with what Suyash has told, right? I think the answer is pretty straightforward for this. Government has to break this cycle, right? So before a space startup get into the commercialization stage, government has to put in some money, be it as a customer or as a support, right? As a grant or as a loan. So in our case, right, we are building this constellation as I mentioned. So and this is a very capex heavy business for us. And also in certain space applications, let's say if I take an example of Earth observation, you can launch a couple of satellites and you will see the revenue, as in you can sell the imagery and you will get the revenue out of 2 satellites or a few satellites. But in our case, where we need to have a minimal viable constellation in place, so let's say I cannot get a significant amount of revenue if my, let's say 50 satellites are not in space, right? Now, government has to bring some kind of hybrid annuity model in these cases, right? They need to support startup, not in just being as a customer, but also supporting in other ways, right? As I mentioned. Also, let's say for the adoption of the technology, right? You mentioned previously as well, like how we will win international contracts.
Yes.
So the government has to play a bigger role on these kind of facilitation. Right. So the credibility has to be set up by the Indian government itself. So let's say if I'm providing PNT signals, if my Indian government is not using those signals, like why would anyone else would be using those things, right? So the credibility has to be established first domestically, and then we have credible enough to sell our services in international markets. And so this is a very straightforward answer, so to say, right? Government has to play the anchor customer role.
Certainly. Thank you for that, Lokesh. When Prime Minister Modi met with you all, he, I believe, challenged founders to make space technology useful on the ground as well, right? For agriculture, disaster management, urban planning. Samuel, your company, mistEO, sits, I believe, right at this intersection. Why do you believe haven't satellite applications achieved that sort of mass adoption across the Indian agricultural sector and insurance yet? And also, can Indian startups turn orbital data into decisions that a non-technical end user could actually trust and use?
So the answer to that is that there is adoption, and this adoption is not something new. Again, I'm coming back to that point. What we are able to do is to do it at scale rapidly, and then find more and more use cases around it, and then build products and applications around that. Case in point is some of the work that we have done in the livestock industry. Who would have thought, like, we're looking at space technology and linking that up to the livestock industry, not in India but elsewhere. That was primarily because the access to that kind of information was there, and then we were able to build that. If you look at the insurance sector, if you look at the banking sector, they are already using the space tech. For example, the position navigation technologies that we are talking about, banking sector essentially. That is the fundamental infrastructure layer that they need to have, because it is all about timing, it's all about positioning, and it's all about how the networks operate based on that. On the other hand, is, like, for example, banks are right now using satellite data to do risk management, of their loan portfolio assets. Reserve Bank of India is, in fact, coming up with a beautiful system that will help the financial ecosystem adopt space technology and Earth observation to look at financial risk and how that plays out over the next, the long-term horizons, the 30-year and 40-year time window that we're talking about. So the adoption was there. There is more and more, knowledge that is being created, and more adaptation of those knowledge, pathways. And companies like ours and some of our peers are actually in the market, earning commercial revenue by providing these services. Yes, it is pretty much under the radar, but it's good to be part of the infrastructure, because that shows that there's a lot of sustainability there, and there is more room. And that's even better. There is such significant areas that we can look at. So right now we are working in 7 sectors, 7 verticals, where our core offering in the weather ecosystem and the weather space actually is fundamental to the operational guidance. Each of those 7 sectors will also have the work that GalaxEye is doing in terms of OptoSAR and other information that needs to come in, the intelligence that can be brought up. So this is again a work in progress, and we are seeing adoption, and we will be seeing more and more intelligence companies that are being built that will support these commercial players, like the banking institutions and the disaster management players of the world. The OEMs of the world, for example, the position navigation technology, OEMs in India can start using that once Lokesh gets its satellite constellation out there. So work in progress, decadal vision. 15 years down the line, perhaps we would have a much better answer for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Samuel. And before I move further, I do have one classic business model question, and this is for all the 3 of you here. Who should pay for these services at scale? Is it the governments? Is it large enterprises, or the individual users? Lokesh, if you want to take this first.
For us, it's both. It's the large enterprises as well as the government, right? So it's a dual-use technology, right? Space is a dual-use case now, right? That is why it is being privatized to a certain extent. So the commercial market is far more bigger than the government market in our case, right? So it depends on use cases to use cases. So for us, like, the large enterprises will have to pay. The large chunk of money will come from the large enterprises rather than the government. But the government chunk is also at the same time is huge.
Got it.
So to put it into perspective, right, the global PNT enabled revenue by 2030 is expected to be $659 billion. Right, that chunk is huge.
Okay. Samuel?
Commercial leading, they have to, and the enterprises and commercial are currently the biggest, market for us. And, for me at least, For our company at least, that is one of the areas, key, customer segment that's actually opening up, understanding and opening up. While on the other side, the government is actually spending, but then again, government's role in the kind of work that we do is to be, for lack of a better word, a loss leader. Over a period of time, they will be able to recover that money. So enterprises are going to be the touch point for us, because otherwise this whole edifice fails. What is the whole idea of privatization is to basically scale the technology so that there is a bouquet of customers that come in. Absolutely. And if that bouquet is just government consisting of that one flower, what's the point? So
Absolutely. Very well said, Samuel. Suyash, your thoughts?
Well, I think it depends on the use case, right? Like, and across the value chain, for rockets business, it'll be like satellite players, it can be government, any satellite operator. For a satellite business in Earth observation is a very dual use, like I said, and it depends on, what's, for example, climate was a very important subject 3 years, 4 years back. Now, geopolitics have become even more interesting subject now, and I think something else will happen in the next few years, right? So I think the budgets will move from one point to another, and you will see the customers, the technology will change hands from one customer to another, and that's how it'll evolve. But I think the interesting thing about space, it's a very dual use technology. And, it's more like an Intel inside, where the technology is kind of always going to be very perpetually relevant. The markets and the use cases will evolve.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Lokesh, Samuel, and Suyash for that. I'll go back to the Prime Minister's vision of a quote-unquote aura, that he wants to attract space engineers and founders from across the world to Bengaluru and Chennai. Okay, so before we go into that, let's also be realistic here. Lokesh, can Indian startups compete with the sort of compensation and research freedom and infrastructure that is offered by, say, a US or the European space giants? What actually persuades an experienced aerospace engineer to sort of build their career here?
I think for a talent, right, the opportunity is the biggest part, right, which they will follow. I think in terms of compensation, we have to be very realistic. We cannot compete in terms of compensation, right? That is a very fair answer. In terms of opportunity, in terms of ecosystem, right, this is something which we can provide to them, right? So we have to solve ambitious problem. It should not be mundane, because the talent look for ambitious problems. So we have a couple of employees in the company which have taken undercut, right, just to be part of what we are building, right? Because this is something which is very ambitious. So we have to be very ambitious to solve the problems. It's the access to the infrastructure which has to be there, right? Because all these engineers, they are very fanatic about developing stuff, right? So we have to provide them that infrastructure, right? We have to get out of the administrative process and stuck into those kind of things, right? If I don't have infrastructure, then nobody will come to my place and develop something.
Fair.
Right. And in terms of innovation, like, we need to give them enough freedom, right? Which sometimes we don't give them enough, right? So I think that's the only thing which will attract talent. First is ambitious problem, right? Second is compensation. Also, like, we have to provide them some. We have to be competitive in some terms, but we cannot match the global numbers. And then the infrastructure is the biggest part, right? They need to have the facilities all around them to solve those problems.
Right. Thank you for that. Thank you for the very candid answer, Lokesh. Suyash, space is deeply tied to national security, right? How does India welcome foreign talent and venture capital without really, I would say, losing domestic intellectual property and strategic control over its orbital assets?
You know what, like, I think this question is more relevant to my founder, who actually pitched it in front of the Prime Minister, and, was called like Mehta, who said this and all, right? So I think he was more relevant for this question more than me. But I think, just taking the cue and moving forward, I guess, it's going to be an opportunity, pure play, right? And specifically in national security side of the story, some of the technologies that we've built, the parallel companies who are building the same technology in Western countries, they want to be more sovereign in nature, right? Which also means, there is an there's a phenomenon of, if you are a foreign citizen, it's going to be harder for you to work on very deep and critical technologies that will go into space, aerospace, or defense, or even in critical semiconductor areas and so on and so forth, right? So there's a natural inclination of the talent which has gone out from India, right, in search of a better opportunity 10 years back. They are increasingly coming back to startups like us and saying, hey, we've done masters and PhDs in A and B subjects, but unfortunately we cannot utilize our knowledge to build a particular product in those countries, right? But since we see a lot of things happening in India, we would love to come back, right? And see, they also understand a dollar to rupee arbitrage, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can match dollar to rupee arbitrage, and they're very mindful of that, right? But if they can have a standard of living that equally kind of matches of what they expect, I think they're very more than willing to come back. And that's a pattern that we have seen. And especially people who are very motivated to work in their own research areas and sector, they're want to come back, and doesn't matter in what side of the technology.
Okay, all right. Let's also talk about the patient capital here, because I believe it takes exponentially more money to build a satellite constellation or a launch fleet than it does to build an early prototype. Lokesh, the government has backed rupees 1,000 crore venture fund. Do you think that is enough to match the scale of the $44 billion opportunity? Does India's VC ecosystem, actually have the patience for hardware development cycles?
So 1,000 CR is not enough to build our constellation. So I think India now have a patient capital, right? We have seen investors, like our investors have been very helpful, and I think Suyash also will have to have a comment on this because of the recent unfortunate failure which has happened, right? So we can better put that into words. So now I think investors have a very better patient capital. We have the large chunk of money coming into the Indian space market, right? And they understand that deep tech will take some time. It will take around 4 to 5 years for us to get into that revenue stage, right? In terms of government support, I think government is coming up with very lucrative schemes, right? You mentioned about 1,000 crores VC fund by in space, right? There is a similar RDI fund, Research Development and Innovation Fund, right, by the TDB. So which is a 1 lakh crores fund, right? So these kind of funds, and then again the TAF by in space, which is Technology Adoption Fund. So TAF has basically in space has basically started these funds, right, from when you are at a pre-seed stage to seed stage to growth stage, right? So government is taking into account of the different points at which the company will fail and what kind of quantum of money they will need. So we need more funds, definitely, to reach to the $44 billion economy and to $100 billion by 2040, the vision of the Indian government, right? We definitely need more money.
Okay, all right. Samuel, what really happens when startups outgrow VC? Do we need new mechanisms like mission financing, long-term debt, or massive purchase commitments to sort of prevent founders from having to sell their IP overseas just to stay afloat?
Again, flavor of the month problem is what it is all about. The idea is, let's get these building blocks in place. That's how I would look at it.
Okay.
So first we need the patient capital, right? The patient capital, I think that thesis is already true. Government is coming with money, and as Lokesh has put, there are several sources that have opened up in the past years. So that's block one. Block two is are the investors, most likely. I mean, Suyash is well placed to talk about that, where patient capital, which is a decadal patient capital. We are not talking 5 years. We are talking about people who want to be in the game for the next 10 to 15 years, and that is a fundamental shift of capital, because we've gone are the days where we want to invest money in quick commerce, but take that money, deploy it in deep tech companies and deep tech ecosystems enable that ecosystem up, and a lot of these people are actually putting that kind of capital in. So these are the two things that we need to solve for now. Let's focus on that. The second part is what you're talking about in terms of deep purchase commitments. No one is going to commit deep purchase commitments at this very present moment because we do not know what is going to happen 5 years down the line. We are certainly not sure what's going to happen a decade down the line. But there are certain indicators and pointers to which this is heading. So if there is a technology that is actually helping to reach its strategic objective, basically bet on that horse, make sure that, there is enough, what we call it, application side that will generate revenue so that this money can be then pumped back and then, the classic VC structure. 5 years, we fielded questions where what is going to be a revenue 3 years down the line? Don't know. Let's put a 20x on what we have right now and let's commit to that. I mean, that is a kind of play that will happen over the next few years for this ecosystem to really fall in place. So this multi-decadal vision needs the first two building blocks to be in place within the next 5 years or so. I would say 2032. By then, there would have been enough maturity in the market, enough capital that is coming back in, and enough strategic use cases for these technologies to mature and deliver those results. And that is the patience, not just the capital, but also from the patient's perspective of the users will also need to come in. But your point is absolutely valid. Your point is very, very to the point. It's like, we need all the three, but it's a question of sequencing. If somebody goes in today and say, what, we're going to give you a deep purchase commitment of over the next 7 years, I would not buy it because, we know for a fact that will change. So let's not go down that path. Let's get the first two things in order. Let's get the maturity scale up. Let's ensure that the upstream, midstream, downstream, as per my earlier comment, each of them grows in that very same structure that we need. Let's sequence it properly, and then automatically the valorization will follow.
Right. Thank you for that, Samuel. As we look to the future, we have to acknowledge the reality of physics here, right? Space innovation requires experimentation, and inevitably, a rocket will fail or a satellite will go dark. Lokesh, the question is to you here. When that major failure happens on the private side, will government and investor support remain consistent? And also, how should regulators really respond to failure without making experimentation sort of expensive per se?
So I think I'm not the right person in the panel to comment on this. I think we have a better person in the panel to comment on this.
Lokesh, I'm so sorry. I'll have to interrupt you that I'm not able to hear your audio. If you could just repeat what you just said.
I'm audible now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Right. So I think what I'm saying is we have a much more better panelist currently, right? I think, Suyash, if we can take this answer, that would be better.
Sure. So, Yash, if you want to give your perspective on that.
No, sure. I think, see, the failures are bound to happen in space.
Exactly.
Space is a classic example of 3 attempts and then the fourth happened, right? We as an ecosystem, and we're very fortunate, by the way, to be backed by the stakeholders, the shareholders, right, the government and the entire space industry who has supported us in the case, right? When Drishti kind of operated for a month and then kind of have amidst an anomaly, we were not able to be in contact later. I think it was a classic case where we got heavily supported by the entire ecosystem, and I think it has to be consistent. Unless we try new things, we attempted something of world's first of its own kind, and we keep close. The learnings that we have are immense, right? If somebody can do it again, we are probably the closest people to do it again, right? And every kind of attempt and try will take you one step, probably 100 steps closer in space rather than one step closer, right? So I think those are the things that we should not be worried about. In fact, this is something that was also told by chairman in space to me, that you should be not worried about disclosing this. You go ahead and do it, and this is something that you really need to be proud of, that this was something which was attempted in space. And you have to be honest, and you have to kind of culturally, this is one fundamental thing where you can build trust from the space industry to the global players. And if you can disclose these kind of information,
Yeah.
people will feel that, okay, you're honestly disclosing everything and not trying to kind of package it in a different way.
Right.
And I think it is going to be inevitable. We need to adopt these things. We need to be kind of accepting these steps towards the best thing, that's going to come in the next decade or so.
Okay.
If we fear failure, we will never try and push boundaries in space.
Absolutely.
Right? And if we don't push boundaries in space, we will never be able to compete globally on some of the best value props that we can offer.
Certainly.
So I think Lokesh kind of navigated this question towards me because we were in a state. But I think I can't be more thankful to the entire ecosystem and to everyone who's around and supporting GalaxEye, and the learning that we had and the pace that we have again taken ahead, or rather pace that we have gained for the launch of the next 2 satellites. So it's amazing.
All right, very well said, Suyash. Thank you for that. Okay, Samuel, to give founders the confidence to take those sort of risks, does India urgently need to have a comprehensive Space Activities Act that sort of clearly covers the liability and the commercial ownership? Do you think that should be there in the picture?
It is an industry default to have that. It's not just for the the founders to step in and do it. Most of us, we stepped in without that safety net, right? So that safety net does really provide a lot of it provides support, but it does not provide inspiration. There are two different things, right? So that is the case. So, but what we have seen though is some of these outreach activities that is being done. The school rocketry work that is being done, supported by InSpace. Amazing talent that's coming out from schools, where people are actually looking at, hobby rocketry and things like that. Yeah. Hobby ballooning is another area, instrumentation, looking at data collection, that kind of stuff. I think that is something that needs to sustain over a period of time and go in. Acts, laws, regulations, rules are all needed in place, not just for building a startup ecosystem and building a startup ecosystem, but for general industry to operate within those guardrails to ensure that the strategic objectives are met. That's absolutely a given and a guarantee that needs to happen. The rest of the stuff is, how do we inspire a growing generation of entrepreneurs, of talent to come in and take a step and say, this is what we are going to do, and go at it. That's basically the thing. And I think the Prime Minister's comment, if I'm recollecting it correctly, is he basically said in that meeting, look at Atal tinkering centers, and build this into them so that the growing generations can actually start building small conceptual businesses that could potentially scale into large industrial complexes over the period of time.
Right. Thank you for that, Samuel.
I think I would just
I'm out of time here. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
You're saying something.
Yeah, I would just like to add one point. I think in India we don't respond to failure very well up till now, right? So I think we make failure a big deal, right? Failure is a process of getting there, right? As Suyash rightly mentioned. So it's a process of reaching 100 times much more closer to what it was intended to be. Right, it will trigger us to do better engineering with better precision and to come up with a better product. So I think in abroad, people celebrate failures, right? If you see how SpaceX is doing their Starship test, right? Now they are launching their Starship 14, right? So they are not looking the mission in one go, right? They're looking at it in steps. And this is what we need to learn from the West. I think this is one thing which we can really learn. I think we really demoralize to a certain extent in India with the term failure.
Yeah, you're being quite, I would say, modest when you're saying that we don't take failure nicely. I think in India especially, failure is almost like he who must not be named. So you're very, very correct on that end. But yeah, absolutely, Lokesh, brilliant point there. if we are, actually we are setting up ambitions of that scale for us for the private space sector, I think failure is going to be part and parcel of it, and we need to be very, very open to it. Absolutely.
Can I just make
Sam,
one
yes,
final point? Maybe
please.
you want to edit that into some other sequence. Do you remember that launch failure that happened where the Prime Minister was also there? And do you remember the broadcast that happened after that, where the Prime Minister was consoling
He was
chairman
hugging
of
and
ISRO?
consoling. Yes. Yeah.
It's a very powerful message. It is a very powerful message. So
I'm sure.
That's essentially what I just wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Lokesh, Samuel, and Suyash. Again, in the interest of time, I'll have to wrap this segment, but I do have one final question for all the three of you. While we have spoken about the cost-effective part of this whole conversation, but having said that, India's private space economy now spans rockets and Earth observation and technologies that barely existed a decade ago. And surely we have come a very, very far, from where we started. A decade from now, will India be known globally as a country that, builds space technologies affordably, or as the place where the future of space is actually designed? Because, given the recent developments that have happened and this conversation that has just taken place, I think I would personally say that we are on the second option, but what do you gentlemen have to say on that? Lokesh, if you want to take it first.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think India will, in a decade, will become the global space leader. This is what I can say, and I'm not being very humble about it. The kind of startups which we are looking at right now, right? The pace at which we are moving. And India has a lot of problems, right? On ground, we have a lot of problems. And this is the opportunity where we can wrap this problem into an exportable space products, right? We can solve all this problem with the space development. So I think India will touch the corners where I think foreign best people have even not thought of those kind of stuff, because we really face those kind of issues in day-to-day life, right? And we have seen the examples of UPI reaching to all 100 crores individuals, right?
Absolutely.
So I think India will become a global space leader in next decade.
Amen to that, Lokesh. Samuel?
Piggybacking on what Lokesh had said, we have problems. We will package it, but we will solve it internally before we make it exportable. As I said, there are no leaders or followers in this entire thing. Again, it is a very gradual, well-measured, stepped process that really has to respond to the nation's, nation's requirements first before we even think about, let's bring, customer X or customer Y from internationally. A decade down the line, India will lead. If not the entire sector, but at least a couple of things in these, a couple of subsectors, we will be the leaders, and we hope to contribute towards that.
All right. So yes, your thoughts.
I think, it goes without saying, absolutely the ambition is to lead, be it subsectors or, in few categories, like Samuel said. I'm pretty confident we'll be subsector leaders, but, I think, going back to the example that Lokesh took from an UPI perspective, right? See, I think India should be leading globally by solving its own problems, rather than trying to solve for some other problems and then trying to make a technology around it, right? So UPI was our problem to be digitally kind of relevant as a country, and we solved for it, and now that product is going out. In space also, we have to find our own problems. It's not the race of launching 10,000 satellites. Race is to kind of cater to the use cases that will allow government to do governance, the use cases that will allow us to do national security, the use cases that allow us to allow our enterprise customers to really thrive. And in the process, we will build some infrastructure and technologies that will become globally relevant. So I believe in that, rather than saying, okay, somebody has built 10,000 satellites, maybe probably 1,000 were enough for us, right? We don't know. Okay. So I think we'll evolve on that and we lead with that.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Lokesh, Samuel, and Suyash. This has been a fantastic conversation, to say the least. Thank you so much for your time. And ladies and gentlemen, and whoever the audience who is watching this right now, the audience of developers, aerospace engineers and founders, I want to say this one thing, that the foundation has been laid, but having said that, scaling deep tech requires more than just policy ambition. It requires an engineering culture that can sort of survive failure and execute consistently. So are we ready for that transition? By the looks of it and by this conversation, I would say yes. And I believe that our private space sector will not take no for an answer. So we are very, very optimistic on that front. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining, for giving us your time on this episode of Point Break. And ladies and gentlemen, whoever has tuned in right now, let us know what you think in the comment section below. I'm Antara, and we'll see you again in the next episode of Point Break.